We're talking all about supply chains today, in particular ethical supply chains. We're going to stick to the key themes of this overall summit. So first, we'll talk about the financial and business case. Then we'll talk about tracking and measuring progress within supply chains in terms of looking at it in terms of a whole sector, but also within individual businesses. And then we'll talk about inclusivity towards the end for roughly about 5 minutes. We'll also have roughly 5 to 10 minutes for questions at the end. Before I get going on the financial case for ethical supply chains, I'd like to say we've got an audience poll question, something interactive to keep you awake, all right? So, the audience electronic poll question, which should pop up behind me perhaps shortly, is, do you think consumers are willing to pay higher prices to ensure their products are sourced and manufactured ethically? That's the question, all right? It'll be a yes, no, and possibly a depends as well. So that's the question, all right? Do you think consumers are willing to pay a higher price? If you can, answer as soon as possible, and we'll chime back in on it shortly. All right, so I'd like to get going and talk about the financial case for sustainability, right? But before I talk about the financial case, perhaps we should separate that from the business case. And I'd like to bring in Özgür, yourself, a lawyer, to talk about the business case for why sort of ethical supply chains matter in business.
So when we talk about the business case, it's about justification of what we're doing. Why are we doing what we're doing, and how does it, serve us, serve one way or the other? And when we talk about the business case, there is legal considerations in it. There's financial considerations in it. There's reputational considerations in it. Therefore, a business case is made up of different elements. And when we talk about the business case for sustainability, and when we talk about why do we have to be sustainable, I'd like to a little bit touch upon the legal side, because I'm a lawyer, work for a law firm, and like to give you a little bit background of the legal developments. The whole thing started as corporate social responsibility, which turned into business and human rights, and now we call it ESG.
Yeah.
And ESG is becoming a law as well. It was soft law before, now it's becoming hard law with the EU directives. EU will be followed by other continents and countries, supposedly, hopefully. And we are trying to do something here, which is trying to grasp how we can serve our interests, but at the same time serve the greater community, or serve, all of us together, because we are a part of this world, part of the community. We cannot live alone. We depend on each other. Therefore, while taking care of each other, we need to take care of. While taking care of ourselves, we also need to take care of each other, and trying to get this right. And that's why it's becoming a legal obligation, because we see that it is absolutely necessary. We can't do otherwise. Getting this right is a struggle, and that is the struggle that causes us to question, should we do it, should we not do it, how can we do it, and are we doing it right? And so this is a journey, and then it's supported by legal developments, financial considerations, ethical considerations, and reputational considerations, the demands of the consumers and stuff. But I think this journey is going to continue. We absolutely have to do it. ESG might become something else. We might call it, I don't know, something else down the line in 5-10 years. But it's here to stay. It'll be supported by law, and I think this is the business case for sustainability.
So just to touch upon what Özgür said there, we've got the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, mouthful. They've just agreed upon that, and that's going to be a civil law instrument to hold companies accountable for environmental degradation and human rights abuses. They've just agreed upon the wording for that in June. In Germany, at the start of the year, they put into effect their supply chain law, affecting companies of up to 3,000 people. From June onwards, I think they're working on a law that affects companies of 1,000 people, and this EU directive is looking at companies of 250 or more people. So we've spoken about the business case. I know, Jo, you're particularly keen to talk about the financial case for ethical supply chains.
Well, I'm keen to actually say that we can't talk about the financial case. It's actually about value. And we need to move the narrative from financial to actually value, because we've got to change the narrative to assuming that there's a financial business case to do sustainability. There's not. So I think in terms of why, what is this business case? Obviously for the Body Shop, it's a lot, it's a very simple question, because we're a business that has this as part of our DNA. It's the principle on which Anita Roddick founded the business. So for us, it's part of our purpose, it's part of our DNA. But actually for businesses more generally, not only is it the right thing to do, but as Özgür mentioned, there's the increase in legal, different reputational elements. Investors are looking at this. But actually there's research that shows as well that brands with purpose are actually more profitable, have better customer satisfaction, better market share, grow faster, better future-proofed, and actually attract and retain talent better. So I think it's a whole broader piece for sustainability. And as well, we can't do business on a dying or dead planet.
I saw a few nods there when you said brands are more profitable. And then I saw Kathrina nodding massively, and I'm thinking, all right, is BP more profitable thanks to this?
Well, it's interesting because I completely agree about us talking more about the value proposition than necessarily the financial case. The financial case often gives a sense of sort of cost and what's the sort of benefit as associated with that cost. And I think that's quite short term in terms of thinking. And we're a company undergoing a huge transition in a system, in an energy system that is undergoing a huge transition. And what that means is what we define as a customer is changing. And for us, customers are not just the consumer on the forecourt, they're also governments who we want to win successful wind bids from, or they may be our business-to-business customers, such as our car manufacturers who are trying to grow their EV charging fleet, and we need to provide the infrastructure to support that. Or it might be the consumer, and we've recently done a really nice thing with the Humble Coffee Cup, where we've sort of reduced the environmental impact on that, in part due to consumer demand. And I think when we're thinking about ethical supply chains, and actually even the phrase ethical supply chain, when I saw the title of this talk, I thought, gosh, to me in a way that almost feels like an old-fashioned term. And I don't mean that's because it's not absolutely critical, it's just becoming so fundamental to any business. And of course, as Jo says, to Body Shop, you'd think it's core, but I think it's, it's equally as core to BP. And we're thinking about resilience of our supply chains. We're thinking about mitigating risk within that supply chain. And, we're in a very complex geopolitical environment. There's lots of different drivers acting on us. And so you really want to consider these issues far beyond what I suppose maybe more traditionally many decades ago, where we just looked at things from a cost perspective. So absolutely, it's a value proposition in my view.
I could see Hannah nodding. I know you're co-CEO at Stronger Together, working at eliminating, modern slavery in supply chains. Have you found it a challenge to try and drive home that there is a business case or a financial element to having ethical supply chains?
I think we see that momentum growing, and the legislation that's been referred to has really helped to drive that momentum. We see that that's landing at the board level increasingly with the organisations that we work with. I wanted to respond to a few of the points that have been raised. So on this point around the value chain, I think that's something we definitely talk about within Stronger Together, within the guidance and support we provide to businesses, to see supply chains as value chains, and that value is actually flowing in both directions, down to the individuals working within those value chains, as well as up to, through the businesses and to the consumers that might be using those products and services, and the importance of that resilience and building those partnerships at every level in that value chain as well. I think what that legislation also provides is an opportunity to level the playing field. What we've heard from organisations we work with is some frustrations where they're wanting to operate ethically, but they're having to compete on a playing field with those where perhaps there aren't repercussions for not operating ethically. So legislation with effective enforcement of that legislation does help to level that playing field, and then that offers an opportunity for those businesses to differentiate further and go further to show how they kind of differentiate from the market. And then I think the last point I wanted to respond to was the poll, and interesting to see what the results of that are. Certainly recent research shows consumers are willing to pay more for ethical products, and we know ethical markets are growing from ethical consumers reports that they do each year. But of course, we know we're also in a situation at the moment where there's pressure on price. And so I think it's really important when we think about that value chain that, you know, the efforts businesses are making to, you know, to minimise the impact of that on consumers doesn't undermine their human rights efforts and doesn't have a negative impact on the workers within supply chains. Because we know when price is squeezed, that often can have a negative impact on workers within those value chains.
Massively. I'd like to ask an open question to you all. Kathrina mentioned sort of how clients are sort of driving a lot of this. Do you think that the changes in place with regard law, we're seeing, you know, if you don't stick to this EU directive, you're going to face a hefty fine. Is that sort of driving the change in ethical supply chains, or is it client and consumer demand for more ethical supply chains? Which do you think it is?
I mean, I'm happy to come in on that, actually. I mean, I think it's an easy answer to say it's all of the above, but I genuinely believe that to be true.
One more than the other.
But to give an example, so for example, in my area, I work a lot in environmental sustainability. I'm really interested in circular solutions within the supply chain. Certainly, particularly in our new business areas, we are seeing it's not that it gives you a benefit. It's if you want to actually play the game, if you want entry to that market, you have to have access to innovative, sustainable, you know, looking at sort of end-of-life solution suppliers in order for you to actually just participate. So it's almost just becoming the baseline for which you're expected to work in. Similarly, if I think about coming back to that coffee cup example I gave earlier, you know, there are driving forces. There's an EU packaging waste directive coming through, which is encouraging, you know, our EU businesses to look at recyclable materials and think about what you're providing to the customer. But at the same time, we were getting that pull from the consumer within many of our European markets. And when we actually looked at, and I'll use a coffee cup because it's an easy example, and I'll remember the facts associated with it. But you know, we did a very simple thing of reducing the cardboard associated with that. It reduced the amount of cardboard boxes we needed to transport it. It therefore reduced the amount of fleet we needed. So it was 50% less trucks needed, carbon emission saving, cost saving. So it can unlock innovation, but it's probably any one of those drivers alone might not be sufficient, but all of them collectively helps really sort of push that agenda forward.
Okay, interesting. You
spoke. Oh, sorry.
You've got a point? No, jump in, Jo. Go for it.
Because I'd say I'd agree, but I don't think it's necessarily binary, you know, who's driving it, the business or the consumer. Actually, I think for customers and business, there's almost like three layers. There's if you think about business, there's the ones who are doing this before any legislation. You know, then there's those who are bought into it because, you know, the legislation has come about and they're complying with it. And then there's others who kind of need to be bought kicking and screaming. And that's probably the same with consumers. You know, you're always going to have the innovators, the ones who are leading, those who, as it starts to get more mainstream, and then hopefully we get to the place where this is just commonplace and, you know, there is no choice, well, not choice, but, you know, that it's embedded throughout everything anyway.
Yeah, it's not ethical supply chains, it's just supply chains.
Exactly.
And they're all ethical.
And before we move on to
Özgür.
I just want to emphasize what you said, Jo. I mean, there are innovators in this space, and I think they are the ones driving this agenda. They are the ones deciding what the standards are going to be. And the legislation is going to come always in the middle, meaning set the minimum standards and try to catch those who are not compliant, but also will follow the lead of the innovators in order to improve the legislation further. And those innovators I think, are really important and doing a really crucial job in identifying what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and where are we going from here. So they need to be uploaded, supported, looked up to, and also they have big responsibility on their shoulders, and they are taking this seriously, obviously. But if companies would like to have a stake at the table and decide how this should be done, then they need to be innovators. I mean, just following the legislation makes you a sheep, and this will also have consequences for the future of sustainability of your business, because that means you're reactive. You're not thinking ahead and planning ahead.
I agree, Oscar, if I can jump in.
Yeah.
But also I feel that sometimes if people aren't forced, and if there isn't a financial penalty for not doing something, then more often than not, people will just carry on regardless, right? Very quickly, I want to move on to tracking and measuring progress in this space, right? Maybe a year ago, maybe longer, do you remember when everyone was talking about the blockchain? Yeah, blockchain in supply chains. Yeah, we're going to measure this on the blockchain. Yeah, we're going to be able to measure everything and track everything, and it's going to be brilliant. I don't hear much about the blockchain anymore. How are we going to track and measure progress in sort of ethical supply chains, either within individual businesses or within sort of the big picture, ethical supply chains as a whole? Is it sort of looking at any key metrics or any key data? Do you have any examples perhaps you can share from your own experiences? I'll start with yourself, Jo.
Yeah, I think there's two things. First of all, there's the data, and then there's the technology or the platforms or whatever. From a data perspective, obviously, you need to have a data strategy, but also you need to make sure that you've got systemized and structured data. It's not just stuck in spreadsheets where no one looks at it. It is something that's guided by your targets, that you're measuring it year on year. And it's data that's actually going to make an impact and that you are actually going to do something with. So rather than sort of bombard suppliers with multiple data requests, make sure it's actually something that you're going to, act on. And I would probably say as well, build it into your existing processes, because it needs to be embedded in the business. It needs to be hardwired into the way that you do business in terms of your existing processes. Otherwise, there'll be more resistance internally. Yeah. So, and from our side as the Body Shop, we actually have sort of social and environmental goals set as our business objectives, cascading into personal objectives. So whatever role that you have in the business, whether you're in marketing, in procurement, in brand, you still get to have something that drives a social and environmental impact. And then in terms of sort of platforms themselves, there's a proliferation of platforms, right? and that can be counterproductive. So I think we also need to think about, what are the industry standards, what are common platforms or common data points, so that we're not just creating a never-ending cycle of reporting rather than actually, creating impact.
Loads of data, little action, right?
Exactly.
Hannah.
Yeah, well, I wanted to echo a number of the points that Jo made there. I think that starting with setting those targets and objectives and that being fully integrated into overall company performance and having that, board level commitment to those targets, but that then has to flow through into actually measuring consistently against those, and if progress is slow in some areas, looking at, well, what are the root causes, why is that slow, and trying to fix those causes. And I think something we really promote from a human rights perspective within Stronger Together is how you move from outputs to outcomes and actually see what's been the change. So a very practical example, because you said as something we do is around supporting businesses on responsible recruitment, modern slavery. So not just measuring, well, this many people have attended a training on responsible recruitment practices. It's actually what did that lead to in terms of improved practices within the business, and what's that led to in terms of better worker satisfaction, reduced instances of exploitation within the supply chain. So how can businesses get to that point of actually seeing the change that their interventions have had? And then, there are a range of tools to support you. Stronger Together provides a number of those kind of self-assessment tools that bring, different sectors together to kind of see what change they're making as a group of peers and how they might be able to collaborate to respond to some of those common challenges within their supply chains.
Interesting. When you say tools, what do you mean?
So we have like a range of, at a basic practical level, it could be an offline checklist that a business can use within an individual site to see what kinds of things are we doing to support individuals to know the signs of exploitation, know what to do if they see it and how to report that sensitively, how to remediate if that happens, through to larger online kind of self-assessment, progress monitoring tools that then kind of aggregate that data. And as I say, we can then use those trends to see, well, what things are businesses doing really well on and what things are businesses finding quite challenging, which is often things like grievance mechanisms, how to appropriately respond, how to provide remedy. And then we can tailor our support and training and guidance to the things that businesses are finding more challenging.
Okay, that's useful.
I was going to come in there actually, because I don't know if we're doing everything that you've just mentioned, but we're certainly doing some of those things to maybe bring it to life. So we have a group-wide target around labour rights and modern slavery that by 2025, 100% of our high-risk suppliers are assessed against labour rights and modern slavery principles that we set in 2019. So I think kind of to your point around checklist, it sets out our expectations of suppliers, and it's things like you shouldn't have passport retention, excessive work hours, recruitment fees should be paid by the employer, not the employee, a whole range of different expectations that we put on our suppliers who help us with our contractor workforce. But when we, go and investigate and do audits and check on that, obviously we sometimes, unfortunately, will uncover things that aren't abiding by those principles. And it's actually those interventions that yield some of the most sort of richest results. And, one area we've really been focusing on is open talk and grievance. So do people feel safe to raise concerns? So we have a hotline that anyone working for us or in our contractor workforce can anonymously call and report. And I've seen it myself, people will email us directly, which is an amazing thing. When I see that, I'm thinking, thank God, that means you feel it's safe to do that.
I was going to ask Kathrina, how do you measure whether people feel safe or not, right?
Yeah.
Probably through the numbers of people reaching out to you.
Exactly, and that is it's not an ideal metric, because that is just an output, and obviously you can't measure the people who don't feel safe. Yeah. So a lot of it has to be site conversations, really talking to the workers there to understand what their experience is.
I'd like to move on very quickly to our final point and bring Özgür in on it. And it's to do with inclusivity, right? Which is essentially the final point on this summit. You've got these supply chains. Very often you've got some vendors, quite small, the little people in the supply chain. Very easy for the little people to get exploited. How do we ensure that their voice is heard, that they're taken seriously by some of these massive companies?
Before inclusivity, I just had a point to add. Can I go back to this?
Very quickly, in a minute, Özgür.
I'll come back to it. So in terms of using technology for supply chain, I was reading the history of supply chain. Apparently, barcode is what made supply chain what it is today. And 80% of the world's trade depends on supply chain. So it's kind of like barcode changed the supply chain. And what is going to be the next thing that could, next technology that could change supply chain? Change supply chain, I was thinking, and I read some reviews about Internet of Things. So Internet of Things could also bring us to the inclusivity point, because it's about communicating with people, getting real-time information, understanding the problem, and then bringing solutions to it, actually. And if we would like to be inclusive, we would like to we would need to be able to know what's going on and have systems in place to respond to that and understand the scale of the problem and understand and give people safe spaces to communicate this information. And the technology problem, coming back to the blockchain, technology problem for the supply chain is not a problem of what is out there and how can we use it. It's about designing what I want and then look out the tools and say which one of those tools can do what I want. And that is the real challenge here, because we are trying to design what we want and how we want it, and so that it's not too overwhelming, but it's useful and to manage this information. So hopefully I managed to answer both of your questions in 1 minute.
You did. You cut the time down by doing 2 in 1. I like it. Right, so earlier on we asked this question, right? In our audience electronic poll. Do you think consumers are willing to pay higher prices to ensure their products are sourced and manufactured ethically? It would be great to see the answers or know about the answers if we can. Here we go. So 52% of you say it depends on the products. Which makes sense, right? And then 26% say yes, and 22% say no, which is quite interesting. If you look at the current economic climate, inflation at 30-year, 40-year record highs, that also makes sense. We've touched upon inclusivity. Is there a very quick point, in less than a minute, any of you want to make on that? I'll take Hannah just now.
Well, I would like to ensure that the worker voice piece is recognised within that context of inclusivity. We've already talked about ensuring grievance mechanisms are trusted, understood, also predictable, so workers know what actually will happen if I raise an issue through this mechanism. But also, what are those wider ways of actively involving workers within the design of human rights and environmental programs? So wider feedback channels, committees, surveys. We've talked about technology. There's a range of different apps to enable workers to kind of understand information.
If I could interject, Hannah. So Jo at the Body Shop, would you have an app or questionnaire for some of your vendors who produce some of the products that you source globally? Does that work?
Well, we're a member of Stronger Together, so
okay, nice.
We use a number of platforms already. I think Hannah's raised the point about how do you hear from workers specifically. Yeah. So I think I won't repeat the sort of grievance mechanisms, channels, etc. But I do think actually you need to practice what you preach. Yeah. So you can't ask suppliers to do something that you're not doing yourself. So, we have inclusion hubs within the business. We have an inclusive hiring program, which really just strips back, how you actually get a job. It's in the UK and Australia. We work with our community fair trade program. It's our bespoke fair trade program with producers, marginalised producer groups on the ground. And we embed inclusion, diversity and inclusion into how we award and ongoing monitor suppliers as well. So yes, there's apps, but it's much more than just that.
Yeah. I hope that's been useful for our audience here. We do probably have time for a quick question, 1 or 2. Do we have any questions from the audience, just to conclude here?
One question here. In the US, we've recently seen ESG backlash and companies walk back their ESG commitments. How do you bridge the gap between that and the new EU ESG directives and regulations?
It's a very good question. I see Kathrina nodding.
I know that's a great question. I wish I knew the
BP
answer.
straddles multiple time zones, so perhaps you could answer that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fantastic question because I think it demonstrates some of the challenges global business is trying to navigate. We are in 60 countries, we have 40,000 suppliers, many other facts I could mention. I think what we try and do is remain core to our ambitions and our purpose, which we've been very sort of vocal and clear about and transparent about over the last few years. And I think in some ways, I think the direction of travel is fairly clear from everything we've discussed already. I'm seeing that maybe as a wrinkle rather than a change in direction. So I think overall we need to really just think about long-term sustainability and resilience. The path is set.
I think to that point as well, it's important that the people pushing legislation within certain trading blocks, like the new EU directive, speak with the likes of the SEC, who are putting together their carbon disclosure. and that all of these different regulators and trading blocks work together so that there's no mismatch between different geographical zones.
And there is some good movements where people are trying to standardize. I know you've got TNFD on the panel later this afternoon. We're trying to have more consistencies in framework and reporting and disclosure requirements, and that certainly helps. So if there are anyone listening from governments, please do continue along that line. That definitely helps us.
Perfect. I think that's a good point to conclude on. Thank you for taking part, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.